For 7 long years, the fortress of Vargfjell has stood defiant, its stone walls weathering siege, starvation, and the wrath of the North's greatest warlords. At its heart, Jarl Eirik the Stalwart refuses to yield, knowing that surrender means slaughter. But outside its gates, King Hroald the Red tightens his grip, commanding an army vast enough to drown the land in blood. The North whispers of the end, of a battle that will decide not only the fate of Vargfjell, but the course of history itself. Among the warriors locked in this unrelenting war stands Sigmund Wolfsbane, Hroald's fiercest champion, a berserker whose axe has carved his name into legend, and Torhild Skadi's wrath, Eirik's most trusted shieldmaiden, as cunning as she is relentless. Once allies, now mortal enemies, they fight not just for their lords, but for the very essence of who they are. As the siege reaches its breaking point, betrayal festers within the walls, the gods whisper of fate, and the hour of reckoning draws near. When the gates of Vargfjell finally tremble, none shall be spared the hand of destiny. Welcome to Hugin and Munin Stories. This is our story, The Siege of Vargfjell, a tale of honor and ruin. Episode 1, The Wolves at the Gate. Chapter 1, The War Horns of the North. The wind howled like a dying beast, sweeping across the frozen fjords, carrying with it the scent of salt and slaughter. Beneath the shadow of Vargfjell, 1,000 shields glistened in the dying light, painted in the hues of kings and warbands long sworn to vengeance. 50 longships had come, their prows carved with the grim faces of wolves and dragons, their hulls now resting in the fjord's embrace, emptied of warriors who thirsted for battle. At the heart of the storm stood King Hroald the Red, draped in a wolfskin mantle, his braided beard heavy with frost. He gripped the hilt of Fjörsviga, the blade that had split the skulls of 5 jarls, and gazed upon the fortress that defied him. For 7 winters, Vargfjell had mocked him, its stone walls untouched, its warriors unyielding. But no wall stood forever. "Bring forth the war horn," Hroald commanded, his voice a growl of impatience. A man stepped forth, an elder skald whose voice had sung of wars before even Hroald's birth. He lifted a great horn, black as the depths of the sea, said to be carved from the bone of a beast slain by Odin himself, and let forth a sound that split the heavens. The gods themselves must have turned their gaze, for at that moment, the first snow of the season began to fall. Across the field of battle, upon the high stone ramparts of Vargfjell, Torhild Skadi's wrath listened. She stood among her warriors, her hand upon the pommel of her sword, her gaze sharp as the northern stars. Though hunger gnawed at their bellies and the cold bit deep, none among them would flee. These walls had held for 7 years, and if need be, they would hold for 7 more. "They come," a voice murmured at her side. Jarl Eirik the Stalwart, Lord of Vargfjell, spoke with the weight of one who had seen too many winters, too many battles that led only to ruin. Torhild turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Let them. The walls do not tremble for wolves." But deep in her bones, she knew this night would be different. Far below, in the camps of the besieging army, Sigmund Wolfsbane tightened the straps of his ironclad gauntlets. His broad chest was bare, but for the spiraling scars of 100 battles. His body a canvas painted in the language of war. The runes carved into his axe Myrkver shimmered as if eager to taste blood. The gods had spoken to him the night before, in a dream of crimson waves and howling specters. Tonight, Odin had whispered, "You will know glory, or you will know hell, Sigmund smiled, baring his teeth like a wolf scenting prey. Then let us see which it shall be. He raised his axe, and the warriors around him roared. The sound rolled across the battlefield like the breaking of a storm, 1,000 voices rising as one. And then the assault began. The walls of Vargfjell shook as the first wave of warriors crashed against them. Ladders scraped against the stone, arrows darkened the sky, and the night was filled with the roar of battle. Torhild fought at the gate, her sword flashing as she cut down the first man to breach the wall. Blood spattered the stone, steaming in the cold air. Sigmund was among the first to scale the ramparts, his axe carving a path through shield and sinew alike. He moved as if possessed, a force of destruction unleashed upon the world. The defenders met him with steel and fury, but he was the storm, and the storm does not break. For hours, the battle raged, the clash of metal ringing like thunder. The snow, once pure, was now stained red. By dawn, the assault had failed. The warriors of King Hroald's army staggered back, leaving behind heaps of their fallen. Vargfjell still stood. Its warriors, bloodied but unbroken, lifted their shields and roared their defiance. Upon the high ramparts, Torhild and Sigmund locked eyes across the battlefield. Two warriors bound by fate, once brothers in arms, now sworn enemies. No words passed between them, only the silent understanding that before this war was done, one would stand over the other's lifeless body. Far above, unseen by mortal eyes, Odin watched from his throne in Asgard. At his side, Loki smiled, and in the depths of Niflheim, Hel prepared her halls. The gods had set the board, the game had begun. Chapter 2: The Feast of Crows. The dawn after battle was never silent. The moans of the dying wove through the wind, carried across the blood-streaked snow like a dirge sung by the Norns themselves. The slain lay where they had fallen, some crushed beneath the weight of splintered ladders, others frozen in their final agony, their lifeblood painting the stones of Vargfjell. From the ramparts, Torhild Skadi's wrath watched the carrion crows descend. The birds had no fear of war. They feasted well in times such as these. One perched upon the shoulder of a dead man near the gate, pecking at what had once been a warrior of King Hroald's host. Torhild wiped the blood from her sword with slow, methodical care. It was an old superstition of hers. Steel should never rest in the blood of the fallen. To do so was to invite the spirits of the dead to follow. Behind her, the warriors of Vargfjell moved among their own, binding wounds, whispering prayers to the gods. Their faces were haggard, their strength waning. They had won the night, but their stores of food had dwindled to almost nothing. Victory meant little if they starved before the next battle. Jarl Eirik limped to her side, his grey beard stiff with dried blood. How many did we lose? Torhild did not turn from the battlefield. Too many. The old Jarl exhaled slowly, gazing upon the ruin that stretched before them. And yet not enough to break us. He placed a calloused hand upon the stone wall, feeling its chill seep into his flesh. The walls held, and the gods have not abandoned us yet. Torhild said nothing, but her fingers curled tighter around the hilt of her blade. The gods had given her a vision before the battle, a glimpse of the end. She had seen Vargfjell aflame. She had seen herself upon the bloodied snow, a sword buried deep in her side. And she had seen Sigmund Wolfsbane standing over her with sorrow in his eyes. The camp of King Hroald was thick with the scent of sweat, blood, and simmering anger. The defeated warriors had returned from the battle with more dead than plunder, their spirits crushed by the unyielding walls of Vargfjell. Within the great tent of the warlord, voices were raised in fury. 7 years, 7 gods-cursed years we have bled upon these stones, roared Gunnar the Blacktooth, one of Hroald's fiercest captains, his scarred knuckles clenched around the hilt of his sword. How many more winters must we waste upon this cursed rock, while our homesteads rot in our absence? A dozen warlords sat within the tent, their faces dark with frustration. Some muttered among themselves. Others drank deeply from horns of mead, drowning their fury in bitter ale. Sigmund Wolfsbane sat apart from them, his axe resting against his knee. He had not spoken since their return from the battle. His mind was still caught in the blood-red haze of the fight. King Hroald stood at the head of the gathering, his scarred hands gripping the arms of his oaken throne. His eyes burned like embers beneath his heavy brow. You speak of time wasted. His voice, though quiet, cut through the murmurs like a blade. Do you think I would have my warriors sit idle if there were another path to victory? Gunnar spat onto the ground. Then tell us, King, what will break this siege? More ladders? More corpses? His voice was edged with derision. Hroald did not answer at once. His gaze swept across the room, measuring the men before him. Then, at last, he turned to Sigmund. Tell me, Wolfsbane, the king murmured, what did you see in the fight? Sigmund raised his gaze. His eyes were still distant, lost in the fog of battle. I saw the steel of Vargfjell is not yet rusted. His voice was low, rough as the bark of an ancient tree. Their shieldmaiden fights like a beast cornered, but even beasts grow weary. I saw hunger in their eyes. They may not break before the sword, but they will break before the winter. Hroald nodded slowly. And so we shall make winter come early. The gathered warlords exchanged glances. You would starve them? Gunnar asked, a sneer on his lips. I would break them, Hroald answered. We will set fire to every scrap of forest that feeds their hearths. We will dam the streams that bring them water. And when they are weak, when they are dying, we will strike. Sigmund's lips curled into a faint smile. Then let it be done. The men roared in approval, raising their fists to the sky. That night, the forest that fed Vargfjell burned, and the crows feasted well. Far above, where the battle was but the echoes of mortals playing at war, the gods watched. Odin sat upon his throne in Asgard, his ravens perched upon his shoulders, whispering to him of what was to come. His one eye gleamed with the knowing of all things. At his side, Loki lounged, a smirk upon his lips. They play their parts well, he mused, his fingers idly tracing the haft of a dagger. Odin did not reply. He merely watched, for it was not his place to change what had already been written. And deep below, in the halls of the dead, Hel stirred, for she too had seen the end. Chapter 3, Ash and Hunger. The forest that fed Vargfjell burned for 3 nights. The flames climbed high into the sky, devouring the pines like a ravenous beast, their black smoke blotting out the stars. The wind carried the scent of charred wood and scorched earth, a funeral pyre for the land itself. Upon the fortress walls, Torhild Skadi's wrath stood, her blue eyes reflecting the fire's glow. She did not move, did not speak, as she watched the ruin unfold. The trees were more than timber. They were the lifeblood of the stronghold. They had provided shelter, fuel for the hearths, and food for the dwindling stores. Now, There would be no more hunting in the woods, no more firewood to outlast the winter. The gods were tightening their noose. Behind her, the warriors of Vargfjell muttered in hushed voices. Some spoke of the famine that would soon sink its claws into their bellies. Others whispered of the gods. Had Odin abandoned them? Had Loki turned their fate into one of his cruel jests? Torhild did not pray. She had given her prayers long ago, and the gods had answered only with silence. Jarl Eirik approached, his steps slow, as if the weight of the world pressed upon him. The old warrior's face was drawn, the lines of hardship cutting deep. "It will not be long now," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Torhild did not turn. "The warriors will fight no matter how long it takes." Eirik let out a tired breath. "And when the bread is gone? When their children cry for food that does not exist? Even warriors can be broken, Torhild." At last, she turned to him, her face cold as the winter wind. "Then we break with steel in hand." Beyond the walls, the warriors of King Hroald celebrated their victory without a battle. The bonfires burned high, casting flickering shadows across the encampment. The warriors feasted on salted meat, bread thick with lard, and ale poured from barrels taken in plundered raids. Their laughter echoed through the valley, a cruel mockery of those starving within Vargfjell's walls. In the great tent of the king, Sigmund Wolfsbane sat in silence. His warband laughed and drank beside him, boasting of the days to come, yet he did not join them. The taste of ale was bitter upon his tongue. "You do not drink, Wolfsbane," came a voice from across the table. Sigmund raised his eyes. King Hroald watched him, his expression unreadable beneath the flickering torchlight. Sigmund's fingers curled around the haft of his axe. "I will drink when the war is done." A chuckle rumbled from Hroald's throat. "A warrior without thirst? That is a rare thing." He leaned forward, his voice dropping low. "Tell me, Sigmund, do you think they will break?" Sigmund exhaled slowly. He had seen the look in Torhild's eyes the night before, the same look he had seen in countless warriors who knew they would not live to see another summer, yet fought anyway. "No," he said at last. "Not yet." Hroald nodded, as if he had expected this. "Then we make them bleed for every breath they take." That night, as the warriors of Vargfjell lay shivering in their beds, Torhild dreamt. She stood upon a battlefield that had never known peace. The sky was the color of rust, the ground soaked with the blood of the fallen. Corpses littered the plain. Some she recognized, warriors of Vargfjell who still lived. Others she did not, men whose faces had been long forgotten by time. She turned. Before her stood a great wolf, its fur black as midnight, its golden eyes gleaming like fire. It was larger than any beast of the earth, its breath thick with the scent of death. It did not growl. It did not bare its fangs. It only watched her. Then it spoke. "The gate will open, and you will fall." Torhild's hand flew to the hilt of her sword. "I do not fear fate." The wolf did not blink. "Then why do you fight it?" And with that, it turned and disappeared into the mist. Torhild awoke with a start, the echoes of the wolf's voice still ringing in her ears. She did not sleep again that night. The hunger came quickly. By the third day after the burning of the forests, the first child had died. A girl of 6 winters, her body too weak to withstand the cold without food in her belly. By the 5th, men began to eye one another with suspicion. It was on the seventh day that the traitor made his move. Torhild was walking the inner courtyard when the alarm was sounded. Shouts rang out, torches flared in the night, and warriors rushed to the gates. By the time she reached them, it was too late. The great wooden beams of the inner gate had been cut from within. The iron reinforcements had been loosened. A traitor had weakened the walls of Vargfjell. The siege was nearly at its end. Above, the gods watched. From his throne in Asgard, Odin sighed. His ravens whispered in his ears, telling him what he already knew. The end was coming. The pieces were falling into place. At his side, Loki only smiled. And in the cold halls of the dead, Hel watched as her halls began to fill. Chapter 4. The Breaking of the Gates. The night was heavy with silence. The fires within Vargfjell burned low, their embers barely flickering against the dark. A bitter wind howled through the broken trees beyond the walls, whispering like the voices of the dead. The fortress still stood, but its bones were brittle. Hunger gnawed at its people, despair at their hearts. And now, treachery had found its way within. Torhild stood in the flickering torchlight, her sword dripping with the blood of the traitor. The man, a lesser warrior, Bjorn the Hollow, whose cowardice had never been worth the iron he carried, lay sprawled before the gate. His hand still clutched the knife he had used to weaken the great beams from within, the blade slick with sap and treachery. "You should have slit your own throat before betraying us," she said, her voice low, almost regretful. "It would have been the kind of fate." Bjorn coughed, blood flecking his lips. They promised mercy." Torhild knelt beside him, gripping the collar of his tunic, dragging him close. Her breath was warm against his ear, but there was no warmth in her words. "Fool," she whispered, "there is no mercy in war." With a final gasp, Bjorn sagged against the cold stone, his spirit claimed by the night. Above them, Jarl Eirik stared at the ruined beams of the gate, his face pale with grim understanding. "This is what they were waiting for," he murmured, "the last weakness." Then the war horns blew. The sound split the air like the wail of the damned. Across the frozen field, the warriors of King Hroald the Red rose from their camps. The siege had dragged for years, but tonight the end had come. Beneath the banner of the Crimson Wolf, Sigmund Wolfsbane strode forward, his great axe resting against his shoulder. The runes upon Myrkver glowed faintly in the moonlight, whispering of old oaths and blood yet to be spilled. He had waited for this moment. Now, at last, the walls would fall. King Hroald stood behind his men, his voice like rolling thunder. "Tonight, we end this war. No man, no woman, no child leaves Vargfjell alive. Tear down their walls, spill their blood, claim what is ours by right." The warriors howled in answer, their weapons gleaming beneath the fire-lit sky. Then, with a roar, the final assault began. Torhild barely had time to rally her warriors before the first battering ram struck the gates. The ground trembled beneath the impact, the weakened beams groaning like a dying beast. "Hold the walls!" she roared, her voice carrying above the din. "Hold, or we all die this night." Arrows rained from above, cutting down the first wave of invaders. Boiling pitch spilled from the ramparts, searing flesh, sending screams into the frigid air. Spears and axes clashed, and the battle was joined. Yet Torhild knew the truth. The gates were breaking. She caught sight of Sigmund through the chaos, his axe carving through warriors like wheat beneath the reaper's scythe. He was coming for her. battering rams struck again, and again. The gate shuddered. Then, with a final splintering crack, the great wooden doors of Vargfjell collapsed, and the wolves poured in. Torhild met Sigmund upon the threshold, her blade flashing like lightning. Their weapons crashed together, steel against steel, fate against fate. "You should have died in the first assault," Sigmund snarled, pressing forward. Torhild met his strength with her own, their blades locked, their breath ragged. "And you should have had the honor to leave this war behind." He wrenched his axe free, swinging in a deadly arc. Torhild dodged, slicing at his ribs. The cut landed, blood spilling across his furs, but Sigmund only grinned. "This was always how it was meant to end," he said. Torhild did not answer. There was no need for words, only war. They clashed again. Each blow struck with the force of prophecy. Sigmund drove her back, his strength relentless. But Torhild was quick, her sword dancing between his strikes. For every wound she took, she gave another. The battle raged around them. Warriors of Vargfjell fell one by one. The invaders surged forward, pushing deeper into the stronghold. Vargfjell was falling. Torhild knew it, Sigmund knew it, yet neither would yield. Then, at last, Torhild faltered. A dying warrior's blade slashed across her back, tearing flesh, breaking her stance. In that moment, Sigmund struck, his axe buried deep into her side. Torhild gasped, falling to her knees. The taste of blood filled her mouth. Above her, Sigmund hesitated. For a single heartbeat, he looked upon her, the woman who had once fought at his side, who had once been his friend. Torhild met his gaze, her lips curved just slightly. "You should have aimed for the heart," she whispered. Then, with the last of her strength, she drove her sword into his ribs. Sigmund staggered, his axe slipped from his grasp. The battlefield fell into silence. Two warriors, two fates entwined, both falling together. The gods smiled. Far above, Odin nodded. In the shadows, Loki laughed. And in the halls of hell, the gates opened wide. The war was not yet over, but the tale had truly begun. And with that, we say goodbye for this time. Thank you for listening to our story, The Siege of Vargfjell, a tale of honor and ruin. Episode 1, The Wolves at the Gate,